This Torrey Conference, from communication and from what I've been learning and reading, we're really talking about shame. And so when I was approached regarding this session, I was told we want to do an all-guys session talking about the shame that exists, in the Biola community among men. And we need a great talk that brings healing and restoration, brings people out of hiding, and just changes the campus of Biola. And then I was told, if you don't do well, never show your face here again. So there's a lot of shame on the line for me in this talk. The title of the talk, you can tell me when the slides come up, is Hide and Seek. And I want to just break down the talking about a game that I play with my kids, and really leading us into how as men do we kind of find that freedom and healing from the shame a lot of us deal with. When's the last time you played hide and seek? Has it been a while? This morning, right. If you haven't played hide and seek with a child for a long time, it is a fun thing. I know it's creepy if you're not a parent, but this is one of those games that my daughters love to play. So, often when I'm home, usually on Mondays, we'll be around the house like, hey, let's play hide and seek. And so the four of them will scurry off into different parts of the house. And if you play with a kid, it's pretty easy to find them, right? You find like a leg sticking out of a closet. You hear giggling coming from behind the couch. Sometimes they'll actually stuff their brother in a cabinet. I have a picture of it. I'd love to show you right now. But it's fun to play with kids because they're not very good at hiding, except for one of my daughters. She is like a champion hide and seek player where sometimes, we'll be looking all over the house 15, 20 minutes. I'll forget she's even hiding and a half an hour will pass until finally she comes out and yells at me, Dad, why didn't you find me? To which I'll yell back, why do you hide so well? Because, she's an expert hide and seek player. And I bring that up because I think a lot of us are experts at hide and seek as well. One of the truths about us that we've been learning about is we all hide. That's just the reality of the human condition. That's actually the story of humanity ever since the fall of man. Men and women hide in this world. And a lot of us, we like to pride ourselves thinking, well, no, I'm a seeker, I'm a searcher, I'm a spiritual searcher. And that's part of the truth about us. We know Jeremiah, he says, God says to us, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. That's true. But what's also very true about us is we hide. All of us do. In Genesis chapter 3, as you guys probably talked about this morning, we see the fall of humanity and men and women hiding after that. And Adam says these words, I heard you in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. And one of the main reasons we hide is because of this thing called shame. And so again, I just want to spend a few moments talking about a lot of the sources of shame for us as men specifically, and then I'm going to finish with one question that was asked to a man 2,000 years ago that I think brings us out of shame and helps us find healing. Let's talk about shame for just a moment. Oh, we're up, huh? How close are we? This will be very interesting for the people on the tape. We're working on PowerPoint. Okay. One of the interesting things that you find fascinating about shame is a lot of us don't like to talk about it. Brene Brown also talks about where, hey, some people when they hear shame, they say, I don't have that, I don't know what you're talking about. Other people, when they hear the word shame, they know what it is, but they say, I don't want to talk about that. We all love to tell embarrassing stories, but no one likes to tell shame stories. And the reason for that is because shame is debilitating, shame disintegrates relationships, shame, again, causes each one of us to hide. And at the core of shame for a lot of men is this sense that I don't have what it takes. I'm not strong enough. You often don't hear men saying this, but what you see actually is explosions of rage. A lot of research that's done on men and their shame. One researcher, Dr. James Gilligan, 30 years of research on anger and violence. Here's what he says. I have yet to see a serious act of violence that was not provoked by the experience of feeling shamed and humiliated, disrespected and ridiculed, and that did not represent the attempt to undo this loss of face. You see, feeling disrespected is a lot of where shame starts in men. And when we feel disrespected, a lot of times we're not vulnerable about that. Instead, what we do is we lash out. Brene Brown, here's how she defines shame. Oh, here we go. Awesome. You guys weren't going to tell me, huh? No. Let's see. And the clicker doesn't work. Okay. Does it? There it goes. Okay. This is the picture of my son I love. Okay, anyways. So Brene Brown defines shame And here's kind of what she says. She says this, shame is the intensely painful feeling that we are unworthy of love and belonging. And we don't like to think about this as men, but for men, she said, the core of this is it's a fear of weakness. It's a fear that at the deepest core of me, I'm not strong, I can't be the person I'm meant to be, and that will never change. And this starts really early for boys. It starts at a young age when you're not picked for the basketball team until last, and you wonder, man, do I have what it takes? Or when you're sitting in junior high or elementary school alone in the cafeteria, and you're thinking, man, is there something wrong with me? Or when you're in high school and you're sitting there on Friday nights on the weekends, and you're wondering, why is everybody else out and I'm not? Or you finally get to that point where you find someone and you think, man, I'm attracted to this person, but you don't have the guts to ask them out. And so you feel like, I must be something wrong with me. I'm just a wuss inside. Or then you finally do ask somebody out and then they reject you. And you think, man, no one's ever going to want me. Or then someone gives you their phone number and you text them and then there's no reply, which makes you think you're a creep. And then, finally you find someone in college, maybe you're dating, and then she breaks your heart. And then you think, man, there's no good. There's nothing good in me. This is never gonna work. I've never experienced any of those things personally, but I have friends who have. And no, every single one of those, I felt like I've affected in some way. And what do we learn from all this? Eventually, we just learn to hide. That's where it goes for all of us. Because shame in the end is this feeling that I don't measure up and I never will. And friends, this is different, as we'll talk about in a moment, than like just guilt or even just dealing with difficult problems, because you really think that this is never gonna stop. You think that my issues are permanent, they're always gonna be here with me, they're pervasive, they're gonna affect everything in my life, and it's personal, it's about me. There's something insufficient in me for why I must hide and can't show this to anybody else. One person who felt shame, here's how this person described it. I feel my deformity is showing like I'm a deformed person, not just like I've done something wrong and I feel guilty, but that there's something wrong with me. And friends, we as men don't like to admit this, but deep at our core, so many of us wrestle with shame. Now the question is then, where does shame come from? Where does that form? We know it starts, in the fall of humanity, but how does it continue to build itself in us? And analogy that I heard that I loved, and it's been used a lot, is kind of this analogy of if you ever gone to an amusement park or to a fair, you go into a fun house and they have those mirrors. You guys know what I'm talking about? The mirrors where you stand in front of it, you are distorted. So some mirrors, you might be really tall and you can put your fingers out like Edward Scissorhands. Others mirrors, you're really short and you're like 4 foot wide and 3 feet tall and you're like Jabba the Hutt or something like that. And it's just this kind of fun deal. Now on our iPhones, you can do all types of goofy things to your face. It distorts who you really are. And I bring this up because I want you to imagine that you were growing up and your parents had a weird sense of humor and they replaced every mirror in the house with one of these mirrors. And you never knew it. Every time you looked in the mirror, you saw a distorted image of yourself and you thought, that's just who I was. And as you went throughout your life, receiving those kind of mirrored back messages of who you were, you began to have an image of yourself and you decided, hey, here's what my future can hold. I'm Jabba the Hutt. I don't have much of a future. I'm just this wide and this short. Or, hey, I'm warped on the inside, not just physically, but on the inside. I'm not good enough, or I'm not strong enough, or I don't have what it takes. And you imagine how this would affect the trajectory of our lives. Imagine, for example, LeBron James. LeBron James is very outspoken about his relationship with his mom. He says, she's the woman who made me the person I am today. Could you imagine if LeBron James's mom put mirrors all over the house that made him look like this? If he looked like a 4 foot wide, 3 foot tall person, he would have never picked up a basketball. He would have never tried out. Why? Because he would have a distorted image of who he really is. You see, when it comes to shame, one truth about it is that you and I are at the mercy of the mirrors in our lives. What has been mirrored back to us. And there's tons of research that I'm not an expert in, but all about attachment theory that maybe you guys have been hearing about, where even the face of a parent from an early age will mirror back to a child, is everything okay in the world? Are you okay to attach to? Are you welcome with your feelings to me? If some of you had a parent and their face lit up when you walked into a room, it told you messages about yourself. It mirrored back to you the man you are. At the same time, if you had somebody who would turn their back on you or who didn't mirror back that kind of effective behavior, then again, you'd feel detached and you'd feel like, I guess there's something wrong with me on the inside. Again, you read who you are in the faces of the people in your life. That's part of the deal with shame. And for some of us, if we're honest, some of us, we've received messages, you're not smart enough, you're not strong enough, you're not good enough through some of these mirrors. And this is one of the most powerful forces in our lives. A lot of times we like to think, well, I could reason my way past those messages, or I could encourage my way past the shame. But the reality is, you guys know, shame is infinitely more powerful than encouragement, more powerful than reasoning. And let me just give you another analogy from my family that comes from amusement parks. Whenever you go to amusement parks, with my family, a fair or Knott's Berry Farm, we just love to go on rides. Kids want to go on as many rides as they can, as many as they're tall enough to go on. And it's not a problem for us until we get to a ride that involves heights, Ferris wheels in particular. And when we get to the Ferris wheels, the problem is one of the people in our family is afraid of the heights. And so we'll get there and everybody's excited to go on. And this one person will kind of say, I don't really want to go. And at that point, we go into this whole deal. Maybe you've experienced this in your life, where we'll try to encourage that person. So we'll say, hey, no one's ever died on this ride as far as we know. You'll be safe. Reasoning can get you past this, but it doesn't work. And then it goes on, and it's more of encouragement. Go on this ride. You'll be so proud you went on this ride when you're done. Still doesn't work. And then we get to bribery, right? Come on, we'll give you $1 if you go on this ride. Still no. And so guess what tactic is used next? Shame. Shame. Why? Because it's so powerful. And here's how it often comes out. Look, people younger than you are going on this ride. Little tiny babies who can barely stand are going on this ride. And they're not afraid. You should go too. And it's never said this way, but here's what's being communicated. If you can't handle this ride, something is wrong with you personally. And if you don't go on the ride with us, we're going to withdraw a little bit from you. And finally, this one works so well that finally I will say, fine, I will go on the ride with you kids. Just don't shake the cart when we get on top. And the kids on the top always shake the cart with me and it drives me crazy. But again, shame is what will get me to go on some of these rides that I personally don't want to go on with my kids. Yes, I'm the scared one. You see, and some of you grew up in families every day where you heard messages about something's wrong with you if you don't do what I ask. Or maybe you had experiences even in churches and religious communities where shame was used. Why? Because it's an effective tactic. And what the Bible tells us right from the beginning is that man and women were not meant to live in shame. You guys probably read this morning. The man and his wife were both naked. They felt no shame until sin comes in the world. And when sin comes in the world, all of a sudden, the Bible says their eyes were open, and that is when they hid. And for some of you here today, the primary thing I want you to know is, in this conference where I know you're just probably coming for attendance credit, one of the biggest things God might want to do is actually take you out of hiding and to bring you into a place where you can have some new mirrors in your life. You can have some new people who will say, hey, come out, stop whatever it takes, whatever you have to do, stop hiding today and come out and show these people who you are. And when you have these new mirrors, then you'll be able to actually overcome some of the shame that you're experiencing in your life. You see, reality that all of us is this: I can only be loved to the extent that I'm known. Now, I remember my wife a few years ago. She went before this big group of people, and she's like the wife of a youth pastor at that time, and she shares her story. Story that some of you guys might have in your families with abuse and just brokenness and all of this. And after she got finished, she walked off and she felt so vulnerable after. I just opened my entire life to all these people. And then there was this old woman who came up to her and said, no, now you can truly be loved because you're not holding back any part of yourself. When you hold back, you never know, do they really love all of me? But when you actually open yourself up, when people mirror back, then you can know, do they really accept me? Do they really love me? You see, we need mirrors in our lives because we can only be known to the extent, loved the extent that we're known. Kurt Thompson says, shame is not something we fix in the privacy of our mental processes. Evil would love to believe that to be so. We combat it in the context of conversation, prayer, and communal embodied action. Some of us, we still need to come out of hiding by finding new mirrors. And I just want to encourage you, in my life, for sometimes it's been a trusted friend. It's been a roommate even in college who I was able to open up about hurts in my past that I haven't talked to anyone about. Currently for me right now, I'm going to the Biola Counseling Center. Little piece of advice, this might be worth the whole session. It is so much cheaper to go to counseling at Biola Counseling Center as a student than as a graduate. So maybe for some of you, you need a safe place just to go and just work through some of your shame. That's a great thing to do. Some of you, I want to say a word, some of you are sitting and I don't connect with any of this, doesn't feel like it connects with you. But you've got somebody in your life who is experiencing right now shame themselves. And one of the most important things you could do for this person is to go to them and just say, hey, I just want to open the door with you. Anything going on in your life, it's not going to change the way I love you. Anything at all, you come and it won't stop me from loving you. I think there's some of us out there today who you might know someone. I remember in high school having a friend who we could tell he was wrestling with something and he wasn't telling us about it until finally a group of us just got around him and said, hey, we sense there's something deeper going on in your life. We just want you to know, whatever it is, you can tell us. We're not gonna look at you differently. And he told us the secret he hadn't shared with anybody, but you gotta find those people you trust. But would you be willing to say to someone, nothing you could say, nothing you could do that will make me stop loving you? Friends, this is kind of the first part of shame that I wanted to talk about with you today, is that we have these mirrors in our lives that have caused us to miss how God really sees us. And I wish I could stop there, but as some of you know, there's more to shame than that. You see, the whole story about shame is sometimes you actually do have an accurate mirror when you look into it and you see who you really are. And when you see that, it still creates that inside trauma. You don't want to look at it. I don't want to look at the fact that I'm a flawed person, that I have greed inside, that I struggle with lust, that I don't treat my family to the level I should. I don't want to look at that inside of me, but we have to. This is called by Elton Trueblood, redemptive shame. Redemptive shame. And I know in this talk of shame, the definition is real important. Sometimes this is just called guilt. But this is a type of shame that actually is hardwired in us by God, and it's an important aspect of who we are. And before we close and talk about what's the question that helps, deal with our shame, I want to make sure we understand both types of shame real quickly. Whenever someone doesn't experience redemptive shame in their life, that's a problem. If you've ever heard someone about somebody who does something that was really evil and they don't really seem to have any conscience, we say, have you no shame? Have you no conscience? Because it's so important that we have this. Example of this is a guy named Herman Goring. He was one of the Nazi kind of scientists and generals throughout the Holocaust, he was the designer of a number of the torture tools that were used on millions of people. And so some of you know when the Nuremberg trials came, a lot of these people stood on trial for the atrocities that they'd been perpetrating. And Herman Goring, he's on trial, and they're kind of calling off all the atrocities he'd done. And he leans over, he's the guy on your furthest left. He leans over to Albert Speer, one of the other Nazi generals, and he says these words, "Never mind, someday they'll build monuments to us." This is a guy who, again, is partly responsible for murdering millions of people, and he has the audacity to think, no, one day they're gonna honor us with monuments. You see, this is a person who lacked healthy redemptive shame. He lacked that in his life, which makes you wonder, is there still that spark of humanity inside of us when we lose that? So I wanna just close, understanding those two shame now, I wanna close really asking the question, okay, how is our shame healed? Both the redemptive shame in our life and also kind of the insidious shame from the warped mirrors that we have. A lot of times, I think we get this really wrong, and I'm not gonna do this as well as our neuroscientist but just hang with me. Okay, so sometimes we think if I could only be good enough, then shame will be dealt with. And this is the try harder brand of Christianity that continues to go out all over our world, where if only I was acceptable to God, then shame would go away. The problem is the Bible's real clear, you fall short of the glory of God. and it's probably not going to change until you reach glory with Jesus. Next one sometimes is I think, well, if I just tell myself I'm acceptable, if I just kind of buy into the self-help ideas of the world today, then I will lose shame. And again, I think it's important to have real mirrors in your life that show you who you are. But again, you can't just, glaze over what's inside of you. Again, we hide because we know the truth about ourselves. But again, we started out today saying the story of the Bible, the story of God and you, is not just a story of hiding, it's a story of also seeking. And this is where our talk takes a little bit of a turn. And I want to turn with you looking at the story of a man who experienced the seeking of God in John chapter 21. So I'm going to read through this section real quick, and I just want to talk about this experience and the one question that took away shame for this man. So some of you know the story. Early in the morning, probably before 6 a.m., there's a group of fishermen out in the water, and they're fishing, trying to kind of go on with their lives. This story is about a man, though, who's in that fishing boat, who betrayed his best friend, who gave up the best chance of his life, and he's out there fishing until all of a sudden, there's a voice that comes from the shore. It says, "Have you caught any fish?" And these fishermen answer in a way that no fishermen ever answer. They actually say, "No." I mean, aren't fishermen known for telling fish stories? But it's very short, "No," which I think is an admission that, yeah, we're not okay. Everything's not okay. And then this voice says, "Throw your net on the other side of the boat and you'll find some fish." When they did this, they're unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. And when that took place, all of a sudden the disciples knew. They knew this is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say that, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he'd taken it off, and he jumped in the water and he starts swimming. And I kind of imagine when he starts swimming, he remembers the other time he's jumped out of the boat towards Jesus. You remember that story? Jesus, he's out on the water and walking on this water, and Peter says, "Call me out," but Peter started to sink. Peter might have started to thinking about, I remember when I failed him then. And then he's swimming to shore and he's remembering, oh wait, the last time I was with this man Jesus was when I betrayed him, when I denied him 3 times. Well, they get to the beach, and then it gets even worse for Peter because they see a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus cooks breakfast, which I've always thought's really nice of him. But the part that is super impactful is the idea that there was this burning coal fire there. And this would have triggered something, this shame inside of Peter so quickly. Because you guys remember in John 18, it was cold that night when Jesus was arrested and he's on trial, and Peter starts standing around this coal fire with people, and he gets asked the question, "Aren't you one of his disciples?" To which he says, "I don't know the man." And you imagine in that moment, Peter must have felt so vulnerable inside. He must have wanted just to hide, just like all of us do. But the hide and seek story is that God doesn't leave us there hiding. Remember back in Genesis 3, man is hiding, but then God says, "Where are you? Where are you?" Which I think is one of the most interesting questions that's ever been asked of the human race, because you kind of wonder, God, we're no better at hiding than that little boy in the closet. I mean, you can totally see us. It's kind of one of the benefits of being omniscient. You never lose your kids, you never lose your sheep, you never lose anything. So why did God ask that question? And the answer is because he allows us, by his mercy, to try to hide our guilt because we think it's easier to stand there before him. God allows human beings to hide, but here's the deal. He will not leave you in hiding there. So Peter, he starts thinking about all these stories again of when he's tried to hide, when he starts sinking in the water, and when he denies Jesus, and all of a sudden, Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." He probably wanted to hide in that moment as well. And now he's standing, after, cutting off this guy's ear, that's kind of the first ear amputation ever. And then he remembers, denying Jesus, and now he's standing for Jesus, and just probably wanting to hide so much on the inside. And then here gets to the question that you guys know so well, but I just want to close with, he asked Peter one question that I think turns the tide of his life when it comes to shame. And it's not the question you'd imagine. The question, you guys know what it is. Do you love me? Do you love me? Now, why that question captivates me is this is what I think Jesus should have said. Are you sorry for all that you've done, Peter? Do you ready to pay penance? Or Peter, do you promise me you'll never fail again? It's not what he asks. We try harder next time, Peter. Will you make more of an effort next time because you failed me so poorly? Jesus doesn't say any of those things to Peter. Instead, he says these words, do you love me? Do you truly love me? And I love it because we're going back to this game of hide and seek again. In the game of hide and seek, there's always the hiders, and that's always the fun thing to do because you get to keep your eyes open and you get to go wherever you want to go. The vulnerable place to be in the game of hide and seek is to be the seeker. Why? Because you have to close your eyes. Because you have to humble yourself and go look for these people who have decided where they want to go. I love when Jesus says this question, do you love me? Because Jesus hasn't shamed Peter, he's actually put himself in the vulnerable place. You ever kind of been in that moment before and you feel like, I want to tell this person I love them, and you're nervous, like what's she going to say when I say I love you? And so maybe you say I like you a lot or something. Why? Because you're putting yourself out there. Jesus puts himself out there with Peter. He says, let me take the vulnerable place here, Peter. You can hide and I'll open myself up. And that's what a seeker does. A seeker is vulnerable, looks out there. And then finally, at the end of the game, if you haven't found everybody, the seeker will put his hands over his mouth and will shout, "Ollie, ollie, oxen free," which means you are strong and beautiful as an ox. Not really. Okay. But it's kind of like a cry of grace that says, hey, you are free to come home. There's not going to be any penalty. You can come back home. And here's the thing. Jesus is the seeker. And what do we call the seeker? It's on the screen. It's not like we call in football, the quarterback's the one who has the ball, and basketball, the point guard is kind of calling the plays. It's it. Okay? It's not like chief executive it. It's not even like cousin it. It's just it. And whenever we start the game of hide and seek, everybody says, you guys are good. Not it. You say not it. That's what we start with. And God's saying, look, I will send my son to be it for you. I will come and I will seek. And so he opens himself vulnerable, and Jesus says, do you love me? Do you love me? And Peter then in that moment, I think, has this opportunity to answer this question. He calls him Simon. I love that. I don't know if you've caught that before, because he's not thinking, hey, you still want to be my best bud and be the name I called you, Peter. He's saying, you have a choice here. Do you want to come out of hiding? Do you want to just love me? I'm entering a relationship with you. And then I love that he says more than these. Because it's almost this comparison deal, not because love is a comparison, but because you remember Peter, before Jesus, said he was going to go to the cross, he says, you guys are all going to leave me. And Peter says, I never will. Even if everybody else does, I never will. And Jesus says, you're still going to say that. You're still going to say more than these, which I think almost probably has a sting to it for Peter. 3 times he asked him this question. Why? Because 3 times he denies Jesus. And he's restoring Peter in this moment, this incredible moment with Jesus, dealing with his shame. And Peter's only answer is this, Lord, you know all things. Yes, I love you. Yes, I love you. I don't even know everything about myself, Jesus, but I know you know me and I love you. Would you take me back? And then Jesus has one command for him. He just says this, feed my sheep. In other words, Peter, if you love me, you get back in the game and you don't let what you've done in the past, you don't let the distorted mirrors of anybody else hold you back. And feed my sheep. Kurt Thompson says, shame is a primary means from preventing us from using the gifts that we've been given. And as you guys have been learning in the conference, shame is not just about a mirror from your parents. It's not just about something that happened back in Genesis. It's also about the tactic of the enemy who would love to take you out of the kingdom and what God wants to do through your life. So Jesus is saying to Peter, and he's saying to you, hey, the question is, do you love me? I'll be vulnerable for you. And then secondly, would you just feed my sheep? Would you get back to what I've called you to do? In other words, he's saying, this is grace. This is a second chance. Any golfers out there? Okay, in golf, we have this thing where sometimes you get this grace moment where, you can just take a ball out after it goes in the lake or goes in the trap. And what do we call that? A mulligan. A mulligan. This is a moment where this grace is shown to Peter and he's saying, Peter, take a mulligan. can't tell you how many times I wish like mulligans existed throughout life, where you'd be in an argument with your spouse or your girlfriend or your roommate. You say something really stupid, and they're just like, "Hey, dude, just take a mulligan." Wouldn't that be awesome? Or if you're driving and you cut someone off on the freeway, and rather than sticking out their finger or shouting something mean, they just pull up next to you and be like, "Hey, it's all right, just take a mulligan." Or if you have a horrible chapel speaker at Torrey in the breakout session, and you think like, "I'm not going to go back and say anything meaner to my roommates, I'm going to say, take a mulligan, I'll take it. All right, sounds good." We all wish we could do that. And here's the cool thing. The community of Jesus, just like Jesus, is a community not just of mulligans, but it's a community of grace where you can come and you can bring your stuff, you can bring your shame. And Jesus has said, "Okay, cool. Hey, I know you're not ready to be vulnerable yet, so let me start out. I'll open myself up. I'll be vulnerable. All you got to say is yes, and you'll enter this relationship back with me again because I've invested too much in you to let you go." I love the story from IBM of a junior executive, and some of you've heard this story. I looked it up on Snopes, and I can't verify if it is true or not true, but basically a junior executive was involved in this risky adventure, and it completely failed, and he lost the company $10 million. And so he's called into the office of Tom Watson, who's like the founder of IBM and led it for 40 years, and junior executive comes in there and says, "Hey, that's it. I'm so sorry. I screwed up. Here's my letter of resignation. I'm done." To which Tom Watson said, "You must be joking. I just spent $10 million educating you. I can't afford your resignation." This is so important we catch this because this is what Jesus is saying to Peter on that beach. This is what Jesus is saying to us time and time again. Remember one time Jesus is standing over Caesarea Philippi and he says, "Hey, who do people say that I am?" And they're like, "Oh, some say John the Baptist, some say, Elijah." And then he says, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter, he steps up and he says, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." And after that moment, Jesus said, "Hey, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. This was revealed by God. You had a revelation." And then you remember a few moments later, Peter screws up in that moment. And Peter, tries to talk Jesus off of the ledge of going to Jerusalem and giving his life, to which Jesus looks at Peter and says, "Get behind me, Satan." And I imagine in that moment, Peter probably felt a little bit of shame. And he probably looked at Jesus and said, "Jesus, I thought I could do this, but I guess I can't. Here's my letter of resignation." To which I love to imagine Jesus saying, "You must be joking. I just invested a revelation in you. There's no way I can afford your resignation." Another time, you remember Jesus, he tells his disciples, "Hey, you guys go on ahead on the water," and the disciples get in this storm, and then all of a sudden, they see this person walking on the water. And Peter says to Jesus, "Hey, call me out." And he calls Peter out and he starts walking out on the water until he sees all the storm and the waves around him. And he freaks out and he starts sinking, to which Jesus, says to him, "Look, you have little faith. Why did you doubt?" I'd imagine after that moment, Peter felt shame. They get in the boat and Peter says, "Hey, here's my letter of resignation. I know, you're looking for people more courageous than me." I love to think Jesus said, "Look, I just invested a miracle in you. I can't afford your resignation." Time and time again, Peter, says, "I'm never going to leave you, Jesus. I'm never going to deny you. I'm never going to go anywhere." And then he denies Jesus 3 times. And so in this story, again, he's standing in front of a fire, just like when he said, "I don't know this man." And after it, he probably said, "No, Jesus, you probably don't want me here anymore. I'm done. I've screwed up too bad." And Jesus says, "Do you love me?" In other words, he says, "Look, I just invested a resurrection in you. I can't afford your resignation." You see, for every single one of us, friends, who's hiding, for every one of us who feels shame, whether it's redemptive or insidious, God is saying, "Look, I have invested a resurrection in you, and so you can come out of hiding." Jesus is the seeker for hiding people who just need mulligans and do-overs, and he wants to meet you today wherever you are. Just as he's met people throughout redemptive history, God is the one who comes to an old guy named Abraham who laughs and who lies about his wife. And he says, "Hey, Abraham, I want to do a do-over with your life, and I want to start a whole nation of do-overs. Are you up for it?" He comes to a shepherd boy named David who becomes king but then commits murder and adultery. He comes to a prophet, who runs away from him and denies, wanting to follow this mission. And he wants to just die because he doesn't have shade anymore. He comes to a persecutor named Saul. He comes to desperate and lonely people like me, and he's essentially saying, "Look, ollie oxen for you guys. I'll be vulnerable. Do you love me? You come out of hiding. Let me be the mirror that you truly need." One of the things David writes in the Psalms is, about God keeping us as the apple of his eye. And some of you know, if you know Hebrew, you know that word apple can also mean pupil. It can also mean just the little man or the little woman in your life. Because when you get so close to someone, you can actually see your reflection in their eyes. Maybe you could try this later with someone you know. Look as close as you, maybe you find someone really attractive later and get as close to their eyes as you can. And maybe you'll see yourself, or maybe you'll experience a lot of shame. But essentially, Jesus is getting so close to Peter and he's saying, look at yourself through the mirror of my eyes, Peter. Do you love me? Hey, feed my sheep. You have a do-over here. God is the seeker. He's the seeker of runaway coins. He's the embracer of prodigal sons. Ultimately, guys, he's the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, which means, hey, there's no shame that he can't handle. There's no mistake he can't wipe away. There's no mirror he can't fix. And so 2 questions. The question to end with, 1 question, do you love me? And then the command, feed my sheep, get back in the game. And I just want to pray for you guys in that moment for those things. Would you join me in prayer? God, we thank you that you meet us right where we are when we hide. And there's nothing we can do. There's no broken image that we can have that you can't repair. And so, God, I pray for my brothers in this room, no matter what it is that they've been hiding in, God, if it's a deep sense of not being okay, a deep sense of not being good enough, God, would you give them mirrors in their life? Would you help them to know who is that person they can trust? Who's that friend? Who's that roommate? Who's the small group at church where they can just open and be vulnerable to find some new mirrors? God, I pray for a number of my brothers in this room right now who it's the redemptive shame that's really getting them right now, because behind closed doors, the addiction to porn just keeps going and they haven't gotten help. God, some of the desires inside of them, God, that they're holding back, they're not being honest about. God, some of the mistakes they've made in the past, they feel like are too big. And so today, God, would you say those words to their hearts like you said to Peter? Do you love me? Feed my sheep. I pray, God, that you would do a redemptive story in every single one of our lives, that we'd come out of hiding and be used for your kingdom work. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Biola University prepares Christians to think biblically about everything, from science to business to education and the arts. Learn more at biola.edu.